Hey, Rima. Well, I'm so happy to have you here today on my very first Yogaland video podcast. So people can watch
Great.
us as well as listen to us. So I would love to just start with your yoga story and how you started doing yoga.
Sure. I don't know where it starts. I was born into a family of yogis, so my mom was literally singing mantra when I was in her womb. So
Wow, yeah.
that's her favorite pastime. Like growing up, she sang mantra all the time while cooking, cleaning, doing stuff around the house, driving. So I've been hearing it my whole life.
Hmm.
And I've just been lucky. I've been surrounded by so many aspects of yoga always. My mom and grandmothers were always cooking, and they cook Ayurvedic food. So I grew up with the spices and,
Yeah.
um, just learned by spending time in the kitchen with them.
Hmm.
And and also just rituals. Yoga rituals have been a part of our daily life every morning,
Hmm.
evening, singing and praying.
So it's
And
baked into your family culture, it
oh
sounds
yeah,
like. Yeah,
definitely.
yeah.
Um, One of my biggest influences was also my grandfather. He had a passion for yoga philosophy. So he actually used to lecture on the Gita and the Vedas and the Upanishads all over India and also East
Wow.
Africa and even in the States here. So I grew up, he wrote several books on yoga philosophy too. And he just loved to talk about it. Like it was a
Yeah.
passion of his. So I have so many memories just sitting with him and talking philosophy and life.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, he was a really inspiring figure to me and to many people. He was a yogi and he had a practice. Like every morning he got up and did pranayama and asana and meditation and read scriptures. But the rest of the day, towards the end of his life, after he retired, the rest of his day he would spend in service. So I mentioned this yoga retreat center he had in a village in India, and it was a retreat center, but it was also a community center. And
Hmm.
he did projects all over the village to help the people, building schools, hospitals. So he was very much a karma yogi
Hmm.
and had his own physical practice too. But his whole philosophy was like, let's do these practices so we have more energy to give.
Mm.
And his
Hmm.
life was an example of that. So,
That's
so
so
all my
beautiful.
grandparents were very influential, and my parents too.
Hmm. When did you ever go through any rebellion? I mean, a lot of kids are raised with a certain culture and maybe push against it for a little while, or did it always feel? And also, did you when did you know you were going to make it your life's work?
Yeah, yeah, there's a lot in there. I had definitely went through my rebellious stage, and actually, I was very shy when I was little, and my mom is such a beautiful singer, and so we would actually have kirtans at our house and satsangs at our house, gatherings where we sang together and talked philosophy. And for years, I never sang because my mom was usually the one leading the mantras and kirtan. And so I would just kind of be in awe of her and just listen. And then, not till really adulthood did I start to sing and participate more. And I think when I was younger, I was mostly observing. And it's bizarre because my parents immigrated to the United States from India, and with nothing. They built their life from nothing here, and worked really hard to send me and my brother to college and get a good education, which we did. And I actually, I went to college in upstate New York, and like most of my graduating class moved to New York City.
Hmm.
So I ended up living in New York City off and on for about 10 years. And I majored in international affairs. focused on South Asia and gender, and got a job at the United Nations. So I
Oh,
worked
wow.
at the UN for many years and in the
Hmm.
city, mostly in New York City. And that was my career. I was building my career and creating my life there. And then 9/11 happened. And that's what changed my life, actually.
Wow.
And from my family's point of view, it was a moment of rebellion because I had decided after 9/11 to quit my job and turn to yoga like completely. I went back to India, spent time with my grandparents, and just decided I wanted to dedicate my life to yoga and to healing, and that we need to change within ourselves. Like all the stuff going on in the world is not working.
Hmm.
And even though I even have a master's in international affairs and spent so much time and energy and money building that career. And so my family was actually very upset with me. They were like, "You cannot leave this for yoga." Like, are you kidding me? Like, to them, it
Right.
was actually crazy. And they were very upset with me. And they were like, "We've worked so hard to give you this life, and
Right.
you have so many opportunities." Like, yoga is just something we do on the side. It's not a career. To
Right.
them, that's like so insane, you know? And, but I just had this feeling and this drive. And part of it that was fueled because when I worked at the UN in the evenings in New York City, I had started to go to yoga studios, and which I had never done. Like I only experienced yoga at home.
Hmm.
And when I went to the studios, I loved it. Part of me loved the community, and I love asana, so I love movement. So I thoroughly enjoyed the studio experience, but I quickly started to realize that there's so much not being shared in these studios.
Mm.
There's so many aspects of yoga that are missing here.
Yeah.
And I became friends with the yoga teachers, and I realized that I can do this, and I can bring more to the table. And then 9/11. So there was multiple things going
Layers.
on within
Yeah.
myself, but I just made a drastic change in my life at that point.
Wow.
Yeah.
And tell me a little bit about, I know you through your online presence. We haven't met face to face. I haven't had a chance to study with you or anything like that. So, but I think you have such a lovely way of communicating, and I think you seem to feel really comfortable communicating authentically on social media. So I feel like I have a sense of kind of how you focus your teaching now, but I'd love to hear from you. What what is your approach to teaching yoga these days?
Yeah. It's changed over the years, but these days and over the past 5, 6 years, I've really focused on the emotional aspect of
Hmm.
our being. And, um, I went through some hard times about 7 years ago. I had a hard time in my life and was overcome with a lot of emotions like anger and anxiety and um, jealousy and sadness. And I realized at that time that, you know, it was kind of like the hardest chapter of my life. And I couldn't get a hold of my mind. Like it was really consumed with these emotions and they were draining my energy. And I was like just having a hard time getting control of my mind. And it was interesting because this was about 7 years ago. And during that exact same time, there were a couple of my very close friends who are also yogis and have a really strong practice. And it was like different things were happening in our lives, but similar in the sense that we were going through really tough things and having a hard time, again, just like getting a hold of the mind, struggling through these emotions.
Yeah.
And I actually like I decided to stop teaching yoga and just take a pause because I was like, something is just missing. Like something's
Mhm.
not quite right here. Like I'm as a yogi, I should be able to, work through my thoughts and emotions and get through better. So I took a pause, and my daughter was very young at that time. She was only 3. I had
Mhm.
just gone through a separation with her father. So I actually decided to move into my parents' home and just take their support, lean on them for a little while. And when at that age, our kids start to go to school, which is like amazing. So
Yeah.
she started to go to preschool and kindergarten, and I actually had a few hours.
Yeah.
And I was with my parents. So I during those hours that she was at school, I just let myself go back to the scriptures and like really study them and practice, like deeply. It was almost like a retreat I put myself into, at
Yeah.
least those hours she was in school. And and it was so fascinating to me because I think a lot of us, with scriptural books, like we read them again and again, and every time we learn something new because
It's amazing.
there's so much depth to them,
Yeah.
And so these same books like the Gita, the Upanishads, I had been exposed to since a child, and I felt like it was the first time I was reading them from like the eyes of a mother and a woman and just like a more mature person,
Mm.
And it just a lot of teachings came just like lit up for me in a way that was different than they ever had. And one of those things was just that the emphasis that these scriptures have on our emotions and our thought patterns, and really how to, to see them, to recognize them, and then to let ourselves be with them, like go to the roots of them. And all of these beautiful teachings and techniques to work through anger and attachment and anxiety and fear. And so I started to take myself through these practices, and I started to make little like sequences, like a sequence for anger, a sequence for attachment, and
Mm.
each sequence had like a mantra and a meditation and visualization and some movement. And it took honestly, it took 3 years, but I got
Mm.
myself to the other side, you know. And then I slowly started to teach workshops again. And, my daughter was like around 5 or 6. I started to travel, just like weekend workshops here and there. And so I started to teach these sequences, and they were so well received. And like so many people were just, I witnessed people's healings. I witnessed my
Mm.
own, but then I could see it in others. And so I just decided to create this program, and I call it Yatri, Yoga for Emotional Healing. But that's basically what it is. So in the scriptures, they explain this word klesha, which you probably have heard. Klesha means a mind poison or a destructive emotion. And the major kleshas are attachment, anger, fear, um, isolation, depression, anxiety, shame. So I was experiencing all of these kleshas. So I had made a sequence for each one, and I
Mm.
started teaching them, and I just called it Yatri. Yatri means journey, someone who's on a sacred journey.
Mhm.
So then I started teaching. I turned it into a teacher training. And so all of our teacher trainees, we call ourselves Yatris, like
Oh
we're
my
on a
gosh.
journey
I love
together.
that you do a teacher training. That's so
Yeah.
wonderful. Because
Yeah.
I don't want to, I don't interrupt, but
It's
I
okay.
resonate so much with everything that you're saying. Like, I definitely feel like my continued connection to yoga is the emotional aspect. And so I
Yeah.
love that you've put this all together in your system.
Yeah.
It's just, it sounds amazing.
Yeah, it's been so deeply nourishing. I mean, I went through such a hard time, but of course, when we look back, we see why we go through the things we go through, because I probably wouldn't have done any of this if not for
Right.
that. So,
Yeah.
um,
And it's not that it's so interesting. I have to say this to my daughter sometimes because she's very sensitive, and I have to say it's not that it's not that I would wish suffering upon anyone, right?
Yeah.
But when you do go through something and you learn from it, you can then help others through it, and you can hold the space for others. And isn't it amazing? Like, I'm sure you just get this satisfaction all the time of just when you present your sequences or your program, and you're just the tools and the techniques, and then your ability to hold the space for people is really healing. It's just truly,
Yeah.
I can just feel that from you, just like sitting and talking to you, that you have that ability. And that's just amazing. Not everyone has that. That's unique to you. And that's so beautiful.
Sometimes, honestly, I feel selfish because I teach and I'm like, am I doing this more for myself or for them? Because as you know, we get so much out of
So
teaching,
much.
right?
Hmm.
And especially teaching this material, every time I share it, I just heal on a more
Mm,
deeper level, you know? So it
absolutely.
almost feels selfish. But I share that with my teacher trainees that, this is one of my dear friends and colleagues, who's also like a teacher to me, he said once, we teach best what we need to learn the most.
Mm,
And I'm like, absolutely. That is so
yeah.
true.
Hmm. I know. And when you teach it, for me, it's like writing about it, or creating any kind of content about it. The more I repeat it and teach it and write it, the more I remember it for myself. Like you said, it's that selfish. It's like I repeat it so that I can live it. I repeat it so that I can remember it or call upon it when I'm stressed, or when I'm in a challenging place, because that's life. Like, we're always going to go through those waves. So having it like really embedded is
Yeah.
it's just super healing, like you said.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I would love to talk. So I found you through, and I hope I didn't interrupt you. I hope I didn't
Oh,
interrupt a thought. Okay, okay. So I found you through an article that you recently wrote for Elephant Journal, and I'll just the top sort of sub headline is yoga has been misunderstood and misrepresented. We can improve this while carrying compassion, love, and respect for everyone. And I just think it's a beautifully written essay, and it it was helpful to read as, let's face it, I'm a white woman. I'm a middle-aged white woman. uh, I am well aware that there have been problems with appropriation in yoga for a while, and I always, I know I personally feel stuck about kind of how to help, what to do. I know a lot of my listeners feel that way. And I thought your essay was like a beautiful invitation um, to have a discussion about it. And so I'd love to know kind of what prompted you to write the piece.
yeah. So many things, honestly. I've been struggling, the last 2 years mostly with seeing some of the popular narratives that have been going on in the mainstream media, and I see some of it trickling into yoga, and I felt like I was just like silently observing for a while, and then as I saw certain thoughts trickle into yoga, now even into our children's education, I feel like it's hard.
Mm,
Like I can't stay silent anymore,
mm,
and that's what triggered it. Just I feel like, of course, cultural appropriation is an issue, as I stated, and as racism and sexism and all of these, forms of oppression. And it's so important for us to talk about it and help people to become aware of injustice and inequalities. And I personally feel like the pendulum has just swung a little too far.
Mm.
and to the point where some of the dialogue I find is damaging and divisive and just like too much sensitivity, too much
Mm.
like, oh my God, I have to walk around eggshells around Reema and make sure to not, you know, say something wrong. And I don't want that. Like I want people to be relaxed and
Yeah.
for us to enjoy each other's cultures and then like some of the, to me, yoga is a mindset. I used to think of it as a lifestyle and I still do, but more than anything, I feel like it's a mindset.
Mm.
And as a yogi, we are in touch with our capacity and our strength and our purity. And, if there's anything I've learned in life, it's that I have the capacity to move through the obstacles in front of me,
Mm.
and like that's what we teach in yoga that we can. And we are the only ones who can really make our lives great. Of
Hmm.
course, it's important to have support and teachers and community. And I think that's more important than ever. But ultimately, it's like, I'm not going to wait for someone out there to do something differently to live
Yeah.
my life well, and some of these, mindsets of like victimhood or
Yeah.
shame are very disturbing to me because I feel like they are honestly like poisons,
Mm.
and it's like I can sit here and come up with 100 ways the world is against me and I can be right. But then what? It's like we push through, like what's the value of being a victim or
Hmm.
to spread that? I mean, to our kids, that's like to me unacceptable. Um, so I see these things and I've just been witnessing them, and that's what prompted me to write that like let's talk about inequalities, let's work on these issues, but not in a way that we're shaming and blaming and calling each other this and that and feeling like a victim. And I don't feel like that's a good approach at all.
Yeah.
And
It's
I don't.
interesting. I hadn't thought about that. I hadn't thought about the concern of feelings of victimhood being passed on to children. Like I hadn't considered that. So that's an interesting thing just to like absorb. And I understand because I'm like you, like I have never been so strong as when I became a mother. Like I used to struggle with boundaries. I like, emotionally it was a hot mess for many years, all these things, but like no one is gonna F with my kid. Like no one's gonna like
Right.
not no, that's not gonna happen. Like I so that's interesting. And the other thing that just came up for me as you were talking is I can't remember the name of the professor, but he is a black professor. He's maybe my age or a bit older. And one of the things that he points out that he finds troubling about the pendulum swinging, right, like you said, maybe toward like almost like an overcorrection, is he says like I don't want to be infantilized. Like I don't want to feel like and that's like to me a very valuable perspective and kind of maybe what you're talking about, like you're a perfectly capable person, you
Totally.
have tons of resources, your culture has tons of resources, and so it's like this it's such a strange place to be, right, where we want to make systemic changes. Like there are problems with systems. There are always problems with systems, and so it's important to like talk about them and be honest about them and try to come up with solutions. But then when it gets to the point of like you mentioned, perhaps victimhood, then you're left in this position of being infantilized and like the perception of being powerless, and that's not what you want either.
Yeah,
um
yeah. Yeah, it
yeah.
feels almost like the last 2 years, some of the narratives, it's like the world wants me to be scared because I'm a woman and I'm brown and it's
Uh-huh.
like the world is against me and it's that's not how I feel.
Yeah.
It's like uh, I've been feeling a lot of like lack of resonance with some of the mainstream narratives.
Mm.
And yeah, I mean, talking like getting to our children, it's like I hear you. I feel like this mama bear is gonna like come out,
Hmm.
and say, no way, like no one can tell my daughter that she's some victim or
Hmm.
that like I will not let that happen.
Hmm. Hmm.
And it's like it's just so bizarre because my parents and my grandparents experienced so much more oppression than I ever have. My grandparents lived through poverty in India and British colonialism in India. And my parents came to this country with nothing. And I think they faced more racism than I have, being like the next generation here. And so and my parents and grandparents, they never perceived themselves as a victim.
Hmm.
It's just like, okay, they actually, they created beautiful and meaningful and joyful lives for
Hmm.
themselves. And
Hmm.
so I witnessed that. And so that's why it's especially strange to hear these narratives because it's
Hmm.
like, wait a second,
Hmm.
who said we're a victim?
Hmm.
Like,
Hmm.
why is someone creating a narrative about me and my people?
Hmm.
It's a little bizarre.
Hmm. Hmm.
And then to see it trickle into yoga is more bizarre to me because it's like one of such a huge part of yoga is, like I mentioned, teaching us our capacity and that we can overcome and whatever challenges in front of me, I was born to overcome it. I was born to face it. And just like I saw my parents' strength, my daughter sees mine. And
Hmm.
as like as an entrepreneur, we go through challenges, like endless challenges every day. And so she sees me struggle and she sees me overcome my struggles. And so she sees my strength. So for someone to even, open a dialogue that maybe we're going to teach brown and black children that they're oppressed. No, no
Hmm.
way.
Hmm.
That's just, I just feel like that's a mindset that's the opposite of yoga, and that's just damaging.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that really leapt out at me in what you wrote was, I have it right here. Well, first of all, I just think overall, what just stood out to me was you uh, punctuating the need for compassion and understanding and patience and kindness, and that those are principles that yoga teaches. And I thought that was just very, very powerful. And it's and like you said, in the course of narratives can be easily forgotten. But the other part that really jumped out at me was you said, years ago, I brought 23 Western yoga practitioners to my grandfather's yoga retreat center in Kaknar, a tribal village in North India. My family and the villagers embraced everyone with open arms. They didn't reprimand anyone for mispronouncing Sanskrit terms or for focusing on asana or for having yoga businesses. Um, so that just says so much. And I wonder if you could talk about that a little more, that experience.
yeah, I mean, my grandparents and my family, my grandparents have all passed now, but they were it's like so open-minded and loving. And my grandfather, he traveled the world. He actually also used to work for the United Nations, and before he retired and moved back to India permanently. But he was always fascinated with other cultures and traditions, and just a very worldly person, and so there was just a lot of humility, that first of all, if like 23 Westerners, they were mostly European and a couple Americans, if they're interested in coming to our village in India, like, wow, that's amazing.
Mhm.
Thank you for coming and sharing yourselves with us, you know. And they were all such beautiful, bright people. It's like, of course, we just loved each other. And it's like, I feel like these days we're doing everything behind a screen. It's like we lose our humanity, you know,
Yeah.
we just like
Yeah.
write some nasty message to someone we forget that they're a human being
Yeah.
with like their own struggles and their own lives and, you know, and their own beauty and all of that.
Hmm.
And so it was like, you know, bringing that group to my grandfather's village, it was such a beautiful experience for all of us. And so, yeah, just like wide open, welcoming arms. And I mean, in the big picture, like, who cares if you're mispronouncing Sanskrit a little bit? Like, it doesn't matter. It's
Hmm.
okay. You know, and we
Right.
recognize, like, if I was to go to Spain and start speaking Spanish, it
Hmm.
would not be perfect, you know?
Right.
So
Right.
why do
Right.
I give a hard time to people? It doesn't make any sense
Right.
to me.
Right.
And and yeah, it's like we are a melting pot. You know, the years when my family moved back to the United States, I was 10 years old, and at that time I fell in love with the piano, and it was like a huge part of my life. And to this day, one of my favorite things to do is sit at a piano and play Beethoven and Bach
Mm-hmm.
and Rachmaninoff and Chopin. And it's like, yeah, that's what I do. I
Hmm.
mean, like, why is that okay for me?
Right.
And I give people a hard time about,
Hmm.
you know, enjoying aspects of Indian culture.
Hmm.
It's a bit strange, and I say that also, you know, saying that yes, cultural appropriation is an issue, and let's work on it. But it's like we can leave out the anger and shaming and blaming when we remember
Hmm.
that we're human beings and we're here to enjoy each other. We're here to enjoy each other's whatever we have to offer each other, you know.
Yeah.
And the way we take something on might not be perfect, but that's okay.
Yeah. I, I, I mean, you said so many important things. I think we're really fortunate to live in a world where we do get to share cultures. I feel
Yeah.
so fortunate that I learned yoga. It's like, I was actually thinking about it in the shower the other day, getting kind of emotional. Like, I don't know where I would be if I didn't discover yoga in my 20s because nothing else felt helpful to me. Like I never fit in with my religion of origin. I didn't actually really exactly fit in with my community of origin. And uh, like yeah, it just like spoke to me intellectually. It helped me in my body. It helped my nervous system. It helped my heart. And so I just feel incredibly fortunate that we have this like a global, a globalist world. And I think you really hit on something, which is that the downside to being so connected is can we handle it right through our the through social media and through the abundance of media that we're bombarded with all the time, like can we how do we I think we're all trying to figure out how to manage it, so that it's not like we're in our cars separate from each other but on the road raging when someone does something that we don't like.
Mhm.
How do we handle this new level of connection and this it's just so much. There's actually a podcast that I listen to Pod Save America, and one of the hosts, his name is John Favreau, and he just started, like, I think it's every Friday. He started a special segment called Offline, and it's basically talking to other people and experts about this topic of like how do we manage being in this much contact with people but behind a screen, and how do we manage this because it is it does get very rageful, and you do tend to get the polar extreme views. So it's I was really grateful when I read your essay as well, because I felt uh like you said, I mean, I'm sure it took a lot of courage actually, because it is speaking out against a popular narrative right now.
Yeah.
And you tend to just hear the two polar extremes on social media. I was just talking to a friend about this last night. He's like, everybody, in yoga seems to want to just do handstands. So I just think like, should I just be teaching handstands? And I'm like, but you're just seeing the people who are posting in the extremes, like super turbocharged asana or super guilt induced, kind of like shaming. There's lots of people in the middle who just aren't saying anything because they just want to have reasonable conversations offline with their friends, or so that's the other thing that's difficult about it, is that it seems to highlight, whether it's algorithms or just what we're drawn to or whatever it is, it seems to highlight sort of extremist views. And then so many of our points of view in the middle get lost. So I appreciate you, speaking up. And I wonder, how has it been for you since you published it? Were you nervous? Did you what's the response been?
I was nervous to post that, but I've been surprised because I don't know what people are saying, not to my face, but the people who have approached me have all been very grateful and
Mm,
acknowledge that that was probably hard to write and post, and just a lot of gratitude. So I feel inspired actually to share more, because I have been holding back, and again, as some of these ideologies trickle into schools and to our children, I feel like I need to speak up more,
mm, hmm
how these
hmm
things don't resonate with me. And I think, I do represent other people. I think a lot other people are feeling similar,
Yeah.
but it is scary to speak out. And, we live in such a cancel culture,
hmm
and my little business supports me and my daughter. So, it's
hmm
scary. But yeah, I actually, it's like, it feels so good to share my truth. And I even, not to jump to this, but I've had that thought, like I get it, how people will even die to share their truth, because when
hmm
you do, it feels so good and so
hmm
important and so right, So
Good for you.
I feel inspired,
Good
and
for you. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Um, you know, you did right in the beginning, like there are problems with a cultural appropriation. And so I just would love to know, in like a very sincere way, um, like what are some of the problems that you see, and that and what can those of us, you know, who are practicing yoga in the West, what can we do to be more aware, and honor yoga in the way that you feel is appropriate?
Yeah, it's such a layered question because there are issues, and I'll go into it in a second. But I feel like before I do, I want to give a bigger picture of my personal experience, which is that I really appreciate, all the yogis around the world who have been drawn to this practice. And I don't know everybody, but I know a lot of yogis scattered throughout the world, and they become my friends and my colleagues, and I see the devotion and the dedication and the sincerity and the beauty of so many people's practices. And I have a lot of gratitude and appreciation for the yogis I've met and practiced with and learned with, and who have hosted me. Before COVID, and even before I had a child, I traveled a lot and taught yoga like all over Europe and Asia and North America. And I stayed in the homes of, like my hosts opened their homes to me
Hmm.
and gave me their bedrooms. And I sat and ate breakfast and lunches and dinners with them and their family. And I have to say, I have been always treated with respect
Hmm.
and kindness and generosity. And that's like 99% of my experience. It's
Hmm.
just like beautiful exchanges. And and so yeah, once in a while, I'm just like, oh, that I see something
Yeah.
that's a little offensive, but that's just to put it in perspective, it happens now and then. And
Mm.
so I'll give some examples. Well, okay. So the little like a one thing that it feels offensive to me, and I know I speak for other Indians, is, for us, this practice, it's so sacred and it's almost like a prayer, and our spaces where we practice yoga are like temples. And so, one thing that has just like, it's like hurts is when I see teachers um, like curse around
Mm.
yoga, like while they're
Mm.
teaching, like effing this or that. Or even I've
Mm.
seen it in writing, like when COVID started, there was something going around that said, stay the Fuck at home, at
Mm.
home, you know,
Oh, okay.
with an
Hmm.
Om symbol. Like, ouch, that
Oh,
hurts, like
yeah.
so
Yeah.
that's offensive, to see or to hear curse words around something that we feel is so sacred and that is so
Hmm.
sacred to us.
Hmm.
And I get it that it's part of the culture these days to, use curse words a lot. That seems to just be a trend. But yeah,
It
that's
doesn't
like,
sit right. Hmm.
that's painful.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, so there's things like that. But what I also realize, even if I see a little something at a yoga studio that the statue could be here instead of on the floor, it doesn't like upset me hugely because what I've noticed is if I just talk to the studio owner and say, hey, what do you think about putting this here so it's not close to our feet? The studio owner will be like, sure, thank
Hmm.
you. And it's no
Hmm.
big deal. And we go on
Hmm.
with our lives.
Hmm.
So I don't feel like I need to hang on to those kinds of things. Um, so those are like some, little things. The bigger picture, what I see and I feel like we can all work on is, how yoga has it's basically reduced to a physical practice, for
Hmm.
the most part
Hmm.
in the Western world. And when I went back and read the scriptures again a few years ago, now it's like so obvious that like all of those thousands and thousands of pages, it's really about one thing, and that is the mind.
Hmm.
So I think what we can do as anyone who's a leader in the yoga world, whether it's teaching or running a business, is just to take the time to read the scriptures and
Hmm.
and yeah, the Vedas and the Upanishads, it's not easy reading, but like the Gita is not too hard to read. But
Hmm.
to like read these books and actually, really take time with them, like build a community and have a club where we
Hmm.
don't just read the book, but we discuss it and we,
Hmm.
debate different ideas and teachings and really like dig into it,
Hmm.
and to, like
Hmm.
to take that time to really understand the philosophy and the mental aspect of yoga and to then like bring that into our teachings and our work. I feel like that's something we all can do. And I
Hmm.
don't feel like I don't even recommend doing that alone.
Yeah.
And you
It's so
asked,
much, it's so helpful to have a teacher with you and helping you,
yeah,
and like you said, a community of people, even better. And
even
I
better.
notice so many teachers teaching things like this online these days. It's like it used to be kind of few and far between to find workshops like this because I felt like you kind of had to do a teacher training to, that's kind of why I did a teacher training. I wanted to know more about more than just the physical. But now I feel like you can really get, you know, specific focused online groups that get together.
Yeah, I think so. And that's, you were talking earlier, like, what do we do about just being bombarded with all this social media and screen time? And one thing that I started, I think just a couple months ago, is an online community where we meet every 2 weeks, every other Sunday,
Oh,
and
nice.
we discuss, different aspects of the philosophy and different practices. And I feel like that has been so fantastic. And again, I don't know if I did this more for myself or for others,
Uh-huh. Yeah,
but it's been great, I
I love
think, for
that.
us all to meet live, even if it's behind a screen, to
Hmm.
actually meet live and have a back
Hmm.
and forth discussion. And
So
and
do you assign a reading like for that 2 weeks and then kind of like a book club and then you meet and discuss?
This one we're it's more we do a practice, and we'll spend half a little bit of the time doing a practice, just like a short meditation or
Uh-huh.
pranayama or mantra or visualization, and then we'll spend the rest of the time actually talking about the practice, what our experiences were, questions, debates, that kind of thing. So that's what this one is. But I'm actually starting a book club where we will do what you're saying is take a piece of the reading and then discuss it
I love that.
and take our time. Like we might take months to read the Gita, but
Hmm.
yeah, just taking a simple translation and going into the philosophy in that way.
Perfect. That's
Yeah.
great. Yeah.
That's been the solve for me and the balance for me between all this screen time that's just where you're alone
Hmm.
versus when you're actually interacting and sharing
Hmm.
in real time.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. And if I can just say one more thing,
Sure.
just with these trends, these days, I feel like we have become so comfortable like pointing our fingers at other people. I see this in the mainstream world and starting to happen within yoga too. And the teachings of yoga, they really are encouraging us to turn our gaze inwards. And it's so easy to talk about how many things are wrong in the world, but it's much more difficult and much more courageous to go inside and look at what are the wounds in my own being and what are the weaknesses in my own mind, and to really see them and to understand them and to heal, and all of this focus on the outer world, it's like it's good and it's important. And like you said, we have systems that need to be changed. But especially as yogis, we have to remember to turn some of our attention inwards and really work on ourselves and that inner
Hmm.
journey.
Hmm. Hmm. I
So,
think that, yeah, thanks for sharing that. I think one of the things that you point out really well is that when you, I mean, I'm actually paraphrasing,
that's okay.
completely interpreting what you say, but just like when you are kind of in the right mindset, in the right heart space with yourself, and you're kind of aware of your own triggers and aware of your own places that need shoring up and support, when you are then kind of out in the world, um, you, I mean, you really, you have a better shot at people listening to you if you come from this place of like trying to communicate and trying to connect and being compassionate.
Mhm.
That was a message that I took away from what you said. It's like this is the message of yoga, and so this is like embodying the teachings and embodying the essence of yoga is really what's going to create the change that we want to see.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't mean
Yeah.
to oversimplify things, but that was just one something that I drew from what you wrote.
Yeah, I think a lot, well, like when we are in that heart space, we start. we get less divisive. We start to recognize, like, we start to find our common ground. That, yeah, we have totally different backgrounds and cultures, but we all want to be happy and we all want to have freedom from pain. And we all feel the same array of emotions. And so to find our common ground and to find that humility that we're not that different. And then even, with this, you were asking about solutions to cultural appropriation, it just to be, for all of us to be more inclusive and expansive, and myself included, and to recognize that I can deepen my understanding of the philosophy of yoga. I can deepen my understanding of love and unity and healing. So for us to come together and find our common ground and create these communities where we're working together to deepen our practice and our understanding. And
Mm,
it's less like me versus you, us versus them. It's like we're all in this
mm,
together. We all can deepen our practice and
mm,
our love,
hmm hmm Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes sense. And really, yeah, I'm with you. I'm on board.
All right.
Is there anything else that I missed, or anything else you wanna mention?
I think this has been great. I could talk forever, but I feel like we hit some really good ground here.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks so much for being here today, Rima. I really appreciate connecting with you. Thanks for sharing with everyone.
Same. Thank you so much.